Our episode begins with an old man sitting in a cave, drawing patterns in the sandy floor, only to reveal that this is not a cave, it's a cell, as a decontamination beam wipes away his sand pattern. They must be a lot of fun at the beach. It turns out that under all of that hair is actually Chief O'Brien, as he's addressed by the guards who have come to free him after 20 years of imprisonment. He's been here so long he can't even understand the concept of being anywhere else. But he's tossed out, only... So, as a beta tester for our VR Life in Prison simulator, would you rate your experience as good, very good, or exceptionally good? When O'Brien gets up, Kira explains what happened. That he was never in a prison. He got a total recall experience. Only instead of getting a vacation, O'Brien got 20 years of harsh imprisonment implanted in his brain. Kira tells him that none of it was real, and while that is true in a factual sense, in an experience sense, O'Brien has just finished 2 decades of harsh incarceration. So that's going to really lower their rating for this vacation destination, let me tell you. Nice beaches, great food, rich culture, didn't like spending a fifth of a century in simulated oubliette. 2 stars. After the titles, Cisco explains what happened to Keiko. That O'Brien had been curious about some of the locals' technology, and the paranoid authorities assumed that he was engaged in espionage. Before the Federation Party even knew what happened, O'Brien had been hauled away, found guilty, and subjected to the procedure. I guess they're not so much big on justice as they are on the speediness of the trial. Their lawyers are probably all in cross-trainers and bicycle shorts. Bashir is on hand to tend to O'Brien in the wake of his ordeal, and in conversation, O'Brien insists that he was alone for the 20 years. Except for that guy, but he doesn't count. This is Icha. He's been in this cell alone for 6 years, so it's a wonder that he can talk without throwing poop at the same time. Bashir checks out O'Brien, but unfortunately, he doesn't have a physical problem. The way the process works causes the fictional events to incorporate into O'Brien's mind as if they were real experiences. He can't go in and remove them, not without doing what he did to Kern and just wiping away everything.
Listen, Keiko. Miles has been through some terrible things in his life.
Miles O'Brien? You sure you got the right... Miles O'Brien had bad things happen to him? Huh.
As you know, during the war on Setlik 3, that time he was taken prisoner by the Paradans. During his trial on Cardassia Prime, and he's always survived.
So, what's one more bit of PTSD, huh? Just keep him away from any sharp objects for a few months and it'll all blow over just like always.
Miles?
Keiko, I have to ask, are you really a Skrull? After the tearful reunion, O'Brien heads home, but it's hard to break the habits of 20 years, like squirreling away food for later in case the guards decide not to feed them. It was a little trick Icha taught him. And that wasn't the only thing he taught O'Brien in order to be able to survive. The brain demands stimulation. It can't just shut down and let 20 years go by. It needs something. So, Icha explains about how to draw things on the floor in the sand to keep the mind busy so, you don't start masturbating out of boredom.
Here. This is a good spot.
I hardly ever pee there. So he explains about it, starting with making a circle. Then after some appropriate meditation-style stuff, you make a mark, and then you build off of it. It's not unlike what art instructors advise when you want to draw something and are paralyzed by not knowing what to make. You just make a squiggle and then use that to help get you started. It's effective here too, it seems.
After 6 years in here. Well, after 6 years in a place like this, you either learn to laugh or you go insane.
And naturally, as Napoleon Bonaparte, I could hardly allow myself to go insane. What would my horse say? In the present, Keiko discovers O'Brien lying on the floor the way he used to for 20 years on the floor of his cell. I imagine it's really good for your posture, at least. The next day he's hanging out with Worf, the two of them trying to play darts. But again, without stimulation, your brain suffers. So O'Brien has trouble recalling details of the game, and Worf has no idea how to play a game that doesn't end with something or someone bleeding, so it's not much fun. Plus, there's the image of Ichar in the bar with him. He'd throw anyone off their game, especially considering Ichar never actually existed. Sure hope this doesn't mean that we're going back to Season 1 and Rumpelstiltskin's going to come back. That would suck. Jake helps O'Brien get reacquainted with his tools. Remember, again, if you don't use it, you lose it. Right now, a toothbrush is probably giving O'Brien problems. Still, his worries about embarrassing himself in front of the crew are groundless.
Keep up the good work, crewman. Another week or two, you'll be running the place.
Don't you forget it.
Fun times. At least you just got 20 years. If it was me, I'd have been executed. Nonsense, you're not dying on any away mission on my watch. Once they're gone, Bashir comes by to ask why O'Brien stopped seeing his counselor. So O'Brien colorfully explains he doesn't want to keep talking about what happened, and that's all the counselor ever seems to want to do. Having to remember it all sucks. So he'd rather just forget about it and try to get back to his normal life.
I'd have thought after being alone for 20 years, you'd want someone to talk to.
Actually, as counterintuitive as it is, people who have been subjected to long periods of solitary confinement find the reverse happens. That to remain sane, the brain rewires itself from being a social animal to living in a world without people, so that over time, the presence of others actually becomes unsettling. Of course, we know that O'Brien wasn't alone, at least not the entire time, and in fact, this flashback shows him and Ichar starting to get on each other's nerves. O'Brien finally has a breakdown and begins pounding on the door in frustration at being locked away over a misunderstanding.
If you do not cease this disturbance immediately, you will be disciplined.
Discipline this!
The little hip thrust makes that so awesome. I knew there was a reason I respect O'Brien. At least he's doing better now.
Chief, how you doing? I wish people would stop asking me that.
Yep, definitely don't need to see a counselor. I'm on the sanity train and we are firmly on the tracks.
Quark. Look, Chief, I'm a little busy right now.
I'm in no mood for games, Quark. So why don't you give me my drink? Or I'll break every bone in your worthless little body.
Okay, maybe a couple cars have shaken loose, but we are mostly still on the tracks. Nietzsche shows up afterwards to join him at the table. Jolly well decent of him, especially considering he never existed. You really know who your friends are when things are going rough. O'Brien doesn't know how to deal with this, and one thing we can rule out are projections created by an invasive fungus, and that crap does not fly around here.
What are you doing,
I'm going to work.
Miles? As your friend, I have to tell you I'm worried about you.
As a manifestation of your psychotic delusions, I feel it's my duty to ask you if you're sure you don't need professional help. This discussion is rudely interrupted by a summons to Sisko's office, who points out that O'Brien lost his temper with Bashir, assaulted a bartender, and decided that seeing a professional for his emotional issues somehow isn't going to help his emotional issues. O'Brien doesn't really have a defense for this, so Sisko tells him to go see the counselor. Today, not tomorrow. Oh, and you're relieved of duty until you're no longer ready to beat someone up for being a little slow with your booze. O'Brien really, really doesn't want to go through with this, though. But Sisko can't let him off the hook. There's a fair chance that he gets where O'Brien is coming from. He probably saw his share of counselors after the Saratoga, ones who didn't recognize how healthy it was to build a flying engine of destruction before learning that he was the son of God, but clearly Sisko is a very sane man. O'Brien storms off and heads into the infirmary to chew Bashir out for thinking that there might be something wrong with him and that he'll set the record straight, right in the face.
You're not my friend! Not anymore! The O'Brien that was your friend died in that cell!
After O'Brien storms out, Ichar confronts him on the promenade to go back and see Bashir because he's a friend who's trying to help. But there's no way O'Brien can do that, for reasons that will soon become apparent. He heads home, still fuming about what happened, with Keiko on one side pushing him to get help that he doesn't want, and Molly calling his attention to see what he's doing on the other. until he snaps and seems ready to strike Molly if not for Keiko holding him back. The idea that he could do such a thing is what breaks through the anger, and he slinks off too. Yeah, I look at that, and the last thing I see is a man in need of therapy. O'Brien spots a weapons locker and takes out a phaser, setting it to vaporize. And not the kind that'll help clear out your sinuses. Well, unless you're doing like him and pointing it at your head. Then it'll do a good job. Bashir is there to try to stop him, but O'Brien is convinced that he's too dangerous to be allowed to live because of what prison did to him. We see what happened. O'Brien and Ichar were being starved. Even their buried nuts had long been eaten, and there was no end in sight to their starvation. The distractions were no longer helping, and what amplifies suffering is being in a position where you have nothing else to think about but your suffering. They go to sleep, but eventually O'Brien wakes up when he spots Ichar taking some hidden food, and overcome by hunger, attacks him. During the fight, O'Brien snaps Ichar's neck, only to discover that there is clearly food set aside for 2 people here. But now it's too late. He murdered his friend.
The worst part of it was, the next day the guards began feeding me again.
I'm suspicious of that timing. I mean, that they were waiting just to see, not that they were going to feed the dead guy to him. Though now that thought has occurred to me, I suddenly can't unthink it. O'Brien's behavior has been because he doesn't believe that he deserves to be forgiven, that he killed someone over a morsel of stale bread.
When we were growing up, they used to tell us humanity had evolved. That mankind had outgrown hate and rage.
But as I've maintained, this is a social evolution, not a physical one. They are not literally a more evolved form of human, because to do so would be to destroy the optimistic nature of the franchise, to suggest that a better world is only attainable when we have literally transformed into a new form of human being. That would mean there's no hope for us, that we are merely a lesser incarnation awaiting the time when our biology allows us to become angels. A world without war or crime or hunger or disease being achieved by the people that we are now is a message that the world is better because we have chosen to make it better. As I've mentioned before, evolving technology allows us to evolve as people, because by removing the things that push us to desperation, we remove that which pushes us towards our worst aspects, as O'Brien has been. Making our lives better makes us better, and making us better allows us to make the world better. O'Brien's actions show that he isn't perfect, and his self-loathing shows that he's still trying to be. So Bashir is able to talk O'Brien metaphorically off the ledge, and begins treating his depression chemically while sending him to the counselor to work through his problems. But he's on the right path now. So it's all good. More or less. Post-episode follow-up. Annoying character goes to that planet of hats for putting O'Brien through a Black Mirror plot for no reason. Final score for Hard Time is 6 out of 10. It's definitely one of the better DS9 episodes and shows how prison and trauma can affect us, and that often the end of the story is where the real story begins. The only reason I don't score it higher, though, is that it does too good of a job. It's hard to watch at times as a result, and doesn't leap to mind as an episode I'd seek out and watch for enjoyment compared to some of the other dark tales. It's well written and well performed, but it's also kind of rough to endure.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!